Misty Moreno. How you doing?
Doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
I want to say thank you for your service before we start conversating about all the successes you've had and everything you've done in your life. But just to give everyone a quick intro, you are a Air Force veteran, an author, right? A mother, a wife. You are an entrepreneur. So you're so many things. But before all of those accomplishments, all those titles, who is Misty Moreno?
Yeah, so I grew up in Rhode Island, Narragansett, Rhode Island to be specific. So I lived there from ages 0 to 15. And then when my parents got divorced, we moved to Key West, Florida, because my mom had visited Key West like a year prior. And we decided, hey, that's where we're going to go. So I was a freshman in high school and graduated from Key West, Florida High School. So I was a conch. That was our mascot. And then landed in Providence, Rhode Island to go to college and graduated there. And then from there, I served, in the Air Force. And so I enlisted right there from Providence, Rhode Island, and served in the Air Force for 20 years. So everyone always asks me where home is. And honestly, I don't have an answer because I haven't really been back to Rhode Island consistently. I don't consider Rhode Island home. I just consider wherever my husband and my son are. So, and if we were to really dial in a location, my husband and I have been at Shaw Air Force Base in Sumter, South Carolina, for way longer than 15 years. So, I guess that would be home.
You mentioned your childhood and moving from different states and the constant change. How did that impact you with your development as from a child to a woman to being in the Air Force? If you don't mind sharing.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I'm not sure it really impacted me negatively. I think I just always just watched my brother and my mother continue every day and move forward. And yes, I was from a divorced family, and yes, alcohol and drugs were involved in that divorce. And went to Key West, Florida High School, so I mean, living in a party town. But I just watched my mom and my brother do life every single day and kind of roll with the punches, and that's what I've been doing, for 47 some odd years, so I'm 47 years old, and the older I get, the less I think about my childhood and what happened, not because it's not important, but I just choose to not ruminate on anything that happened prior to when I gained control of my life. And once I gained the control to make things happen, I decided that what happened to me prior just shapes who I am, but most importantly, it shapes what I don't do. So I don't drink, I don't do drugs, I don't gamble, I don't do things that I watched destroy, my family members. And so instead of dwelling on my childhood, I just let it, really fuel me to make a future that I'm proud of and that my son is proud of as well.
I can appreciate that. Just like thinking ahead, honestly, because I think now, especially, I'd say maybe the younger generation, right? They tend to really get hung up on the past, like, and there's usually this victim mentality that really stunts your growth as an individual, and it doesn't allow you to move forward. And the fact that you've been able to really look at it from a holistic view of, hey, this was my background, which by the way, it's a pretty common background because there are tons of families that are from divorced families, or even if it's um, a nuclear family and they stay together, doesn't mean it's healthy. I mean, there's a lot of turmoil. And so having that maturity, because that is maturity of this is what it was, from 0 to 18, 1 to 18. And here's what it's going to be from 19 plus. And just using your background as reference of like, okay, these are patterns that aren't what I want to continue doing. And this is what I want to change. And these are the things that I want to achieve, in the future. So I can appreciate that. And, I'm assuming with that mindset, that you had, if would you say that that's a mindset that you've developed prior to enlisting to the Air Force, or was that something you just had internally?
No, I would say it's something that I developed as I grew older, and so I do think that there is legitimate trauma that I probably faced in my childhood. At that time, we never had a label for it. Now we have a label for it, and we have a considerable amount of resources to deal with it, and I just enlisted in the military because I honestly wanted the free medical and the free dental. Never really wanted to serve my country, but not in a mean way. I just never understood what service was. Now, my brother was a Marine, but my brother didn't live with me when he served in the military. So I didn't have that patriotism as I grew and developed, because that's what I did. I joined the military when I was 21 years old. I turned 22 in basic training. And as I grew and developed in the military, I retired when I was 42. I mean, I grew up in the military, and so even though I was, you know, past 18 when I joined, yes, I was an adult, but I wasn't a developed adult, I mean, they say your mind doesn't truly develop until you're like 26 years old, so I grew and developed in the military, and I endured hard times because of probably self-inflicted issues, but I went to counseling, got assistance, and just decided to move forward in the best way that I could.
I think you said something that's truth right there, because we have young adults, 18 plus, that enlist, and they enlist because perhaps in their mind, this is the only option I have. Maybe I wasn't good in school, right? I didn't have good grades. To your point, which, by the way, I appreciate the authenticity, um, because it's true what you just said. Lots of young individuals go into the military because there is something that, they're trying to figure out what their path is, right? And so sometimes having this structure where, hey, I get free medical, I get paid, I can travel, I can get, these amazing benefits if I stay in 20 plus years, right?
My military service story is probably different than maybe most females or most airmen in general. I had the best supervisors my first duty station, Tech Sergeant Janet Bassey, Chief Sanders, Martin Patterson, Peter Smolik, like I can go on. And I had the best support. They were the ones that invited me over for Thanksgiving dinner and Christmas holidays. And Janet Bassey, she was kind. She was not very nice, but she was very kind. And so she told me the truth, even when it was going to hurt my feelings. And she, helped me course correct in ways that maybe others would say, are mean. But I had the best support. And I was able to really simulate in my environment, meaning I was able to make mistakes, but then course correct. So I was able to make mistakes where it didn't go on social media. I was able to make bad decisions where it wasn't blasted. And I had the best support system from duty station one to the time that I retired. I truly did. Like 80% of my career was, fantastic as far as support, the things I learned, the teams that I was on, and the mission that I participated in. So I was allowed to truly be a young adult, grow and develop in the military, which I don't think is allowed now, not because of the military, but because of social media and just the way that society is.
That's interesting you say that. It's, sometimes, right? And to your point, each enlisted individual, right, may have different experiences. And let's be honest, right? It's really based on factors that, may be out of their control. Just it might be coincidence. Maybe you're enlisted and then you have a person that, you report to that is has high emotional IQ, right? Um, with all the support that you had from the moment you enlisted to your retired, would you be able to uh, describe to us what the typical Air Force training was, the processes, the stages were for you during that time?
Yeah. So I'm an airman, and I think it's important to note that I was a human resources professional in the Air Force called personnel and manpower. That's important because if you were to talk to my husband, we have two totally different experiences in the military. But I went to basic training. At the time, it was 6 weeks. Then I went to technical training school, and that was, I think, 6 weeks. This is a long time ago. So, and then I went to my first duty station. I stayed there for 2 years, and then I came to Shaw Air Force Base, and I was there for 11 years, and then I moved on from there. And as far as training, the good thing about the Air Force, I can't speak for other services, but the most effective thing that the Air Force did for me was I received basic training to help me assimilate into my environment. I received technical training to help me become a personnel and manpower professional. And then as I progressed in my skill set, we had a 3 level, a 5 level, a 7 level, and a 9 level skill set. I received training before I received those skill sets. Before every promotion, I received promotion training, like leadership training. So Airman Leadership School, NCO Academy, the Senior NCO Academy. And so throughout my military career, I received all the training and leadership development that I needed in order to grow and develop into every role.
Wow. That's very well structured.
So that's why a lot of people say, well, we want to hire a veteran because they're trained in
Mhm.
leadership. And that is so true because, again, I can only speak for the Air Force, but we
Mhm.
receive training at every single milestone in our career. It's technical training and leadership training. Now, I'm a human resources professional, but human resources is different in the civilian sector. And so, of course, when I received my first role outside of the military, I did need to get trained in what human resources looked and felt like in the civilian sector. But as far as leadership, I consider myself an effective leader and I can lead teams. And that's all because of the military. Like I 100% owe that to the military, but also to my willingness as well. Right. I mean, you could always opt out of training. You could always, half ass it. I mean, I'm a true learner at heart. I mean, I read, I do master classes. I mean, I'm just a true learner. So I took advantage of everything that the military provided to me, all the opportunities, and I'm 100% who I am today because of you know, what the support that I received in the military and what the military afforded me the opportunity to do.
Can you, and again, if you can educate me,
Yeah.
what is Airman Leadership School?
So, Airman Leadership School is the first leadership training that I received when I was in the Air Force in order to what we call so on or get promoted to the NCO rank. So, at an airman level, you are like tactical, right? Tactical level,
Mm,
meaning you're doing the work, you're the worker bee. Now you're always a leader, especially in the Air Force, right? We, at least when I was in, we wore our stripes on our sleeves. And so we always said that you get paid to exercise your judgment. So as you receive more stripes, you get paid more to exercise more judgment. So when I was an airman, I was at the tactical level. And then when I was in the Air Force, we had to test in order to get promoted. And I tested high enough to get promoted to the first non commissioned officer rank, which was staff sergeant. In order to sew on or put on that rank, you had to go to Airman Leadership School. So I think it was 6 weeks at the time. Um, I don't know what it is now, but at least when I went through it was 6 weeks at the time. And it was really just to learn how to lead, like the beginning leadership lessons, emotional intelligence, situational leadership, conflict management, problem solving. Even still to this day, I use the 5-step problem solving uh, process that we learned, the conflict management. I mean, I remember my instructor teaching us, what collaboration was with an orange. So that was the first leadership lesson that I mean, leadership class that I ever attended, really like as far as my learning. And then we went on, and as you get promoted and you are ready to sew on other ranks, then you go to other leadership courses. So they're not, so it was Airman Leadership School, then it was the Non Commissioned Officer Academy, so NCO Academy, and then it was Senior NCO Academy. And I never went to the chief leadership course because I didn't get promoted to chief. But if you were to get promoted to chief, then you go on to chief leadership course.
can you explain to me the orange
Yeah.
example?
So if an orange was sitting in the break room and me and you walked into the break room, right? And we both stated that we want the orange. What would most people do when they see the orange? If we both wanted it, most people would do what?
I would just say, "Let's split the orange in half," but I don't know.
Yeah. So most people would split the orange in half. But Tech Sergeant Davis Fogel, she was my instructor. She explained most people go into situations and they assume that they know what the other one wants. And they assume that they know what the other one thinks and feels. So they make these judgments and they take action based on assumptions. Now, if me and you both walked into the break room and we saw this orange and you told me that you wanted the orange, what we should do as human beings is I should ask you, why do you want that orange? And you're going to tell me, well, I'm hungry. And I said, cool, because I actually am not hungry. I just want the zest because I'm going to go home and make an orange cake. Now, in most situations, it's actually like that. We both don't want the same things. So we can look at that orange and say, we can both benefit from this orange if we have a conversation, which is what most human beings don't want to do. And we talk about what it is that we want. And that one example has 100% shaped me how I am today because she taught me we always need to ask clarifying questions and be mindful of what we're assuming.
So I can, appreciate that because that kinda reminds me of Book of Proverbs, right, where it says, "A wise man is a man who takes in more instruction than speaks," right? So it's kind of similar to that where listen to whoever you're working with or whoever you have to work with before speaking, gather the information. To your point, your needs will be different than another person's needs, but you have a same common goal, right? But the needs are different.
People are afraid to ask questions, or when you do ask questions, people look at it as you don't agree or you're questioning. And honestly, it's just asking questions. As I have grown and developed in life, one thing that I learned from a leader that I have recently had, so at my first job at Continental Tire, his name is JJ, and he's the plant manager, and he comes from South Africa. So his reasons of being in America are are things I can't understand. He's seen more war than I have, and I served in Iraq. So South Africa obviously is a war torn country, and he would share with me all of his experiences. And one thing he always taught me, because he kept saying to me, he's like, people are misconstruing what I'm saying because they don't like my tone. And I was like, I know Americans unfortunately pay attention to how you say things and not just what you say. And he's like, "But that's not always, the right thing to do." He's like, "Sometimes we have to pay attention to the words and not assume that we think their tone means this." And so, with Tech Sergeant Davis Fogel's lesson of always asking questions, clarifying, understanding where people come from, and then with his lesson of paying attention to the words and not necessarily assigning tone, well, now I'm really set up to have these beautiful relationships where we may disagree about things, but we can conversate and have a really intelligent conversation. And to me, I just described exactly what emotional intelligence is. And that's what I've learned through the last, 26 years of my professional career.
What was the highest rank that you achieved during your time, in the Air Force?
E8 or senior master sergeant. So E8 is across the board, across the services and the enlisted. So we all have the enlisted ranks. And so I was a senior master sergeant. So I was promoted in 2017, I believe. Again, it's a long time ago, but yeah. So senior master sergeant is, historically the rank. It's 2% of the Air Force that makes it, and so it's the rank that a lot want to achieve because the next rank, Chief Master Sergeant, just requires a lot more time in the service than most are willing to give. So I've always wanted to be a chief, at least when I was in the Air Force. But in 2019, I just decided it was time to leave the service, and that's why I decided to retire as a senior master sergeant.
Hey, the fact that you're senior of whatever rank in the Air Force, that itself is an achievement. Um, and I'm sure to achieve that level, I'm sure there were obstacles throughout those 20 plus
Oh, yeah.
years. Um, would you be kind enough to share, what your experiences were?
My career field is a female dominant career field. So when it comes to, was I discriminated against or treated differently because I was a woman or anything like that, my experience is way different than maybe some other female, service members. And I know that there are terrible stories out there about sexual harassment and discrimination. That is just not a part of my story and my experience as far as being a female. If anything, being a female most likely helped me because for some promotion processes, specifically in the Air Force, senior airman below the zone and step promotion. So senior airman below the zone is when you're promoted 6 months ahead of your peers. So you have to be nominated and you have to be selected. So you go up to a board so other people are selecting you. And step promotion is the same. It's where you're promoted immediately. And so you have to be nominated and then you have to be selected. So it's not something that you test for. It's something you need to be nominated and selected for. And I'll be honest, I bet being a female, because of diversity plays a role in those promotion programs, I bet being a female came in handy. So not only a female, but my career field as well, because oftentimes those promotion systems, you have your operational career fields that usually get promoted. So for me, I was never discriminated because I was a female. I would say I was probably more discriminated because of my ethnicity than anything, but I never really had a bad experience when it came to being a female. Overall, my military experience was 80% awesome and 20% normal. You know what I mean? I think in the military, yes, the military is different because you're signing a dotted line that you agree to die for your country if it comes to that. But it is still a career. It's a professional career. And so anything that I really experienced in the military, most civilians experience as well. You asked about burnout and stress. When you're a young professional, you're trying to prove yourself. That is no different in the military or the civilian sector. You're saying yes to everything so you stand out and you get promoted. That is no different than the military and the civilian sector. You probably take on way too much. You sacrifice your family. I mean, this story, right? This story is the same as most people. So in 2019 is when my husband and I decided that we wanted a choice as far as where we would settle down and where we would move next. And if we were to be separated, because my husband and I spent, you know, years of our marriage on different shifts and in different countries. And so our son at that time in 2019 was about to go into seventh grade. And we just decided that it was the time to leave the service. So we both left the service, but I went to a new job and I had to prove myself, sacrifice my family, wanted to get promoted. I mean, this is just stuff that happens with being a professional in a career field. And so to me, it's no different, serving in the military or being in a civilian career. It's just the stages of your life, the seasons of your career that most people go through. The difference is now, the newer generations are starting to see that burnout, stress, and anxiety are not the ways to wealth. And wealth doesn't always have to do with money. And so now the newer generations are starting to see that there's different ways to live your life, and you don't have to serve somewhere in the same capacity for 20 years. And now there's really no reason to do that because, like when my grandparents worked, they had pensions that they worked for. Now the younger generations realize that there's no pensions. So, yeah, let me job hop. Let me do this. Let me change industries, change careers so I can either make more money or do different things. And so, I didn't experience anything different, I would say, except for maybe serving in Iraq, but all the stresses that I dealt with for the most part are very similar to what professionals in any industry deal with.
Would you be able to dive a little bit more into your experience in Iraq? How was that? I mean, set aside that perhaps you were in HR, perhaps you were personnel, doesn't matter. You're still in Iraq because you have to go out and do some things that perhaps you can't do at the base, I'm assuming. So what was that experience like?
Yeah, I mean, Iraq, it was 6 months long and it 100% shaped my mindset, shaped who I am, shaped how I view oppression and how I view discrimination. And, I mean, I witnessed what real oppression, in my opinion, this is just me. I witnessed
Mhm.
what real oppression looks like. I witnessed how women don't have rights and how women are,
Mhm.
taking me behind closed doors and asking me to bring shampoo or, you know, stuff like that. Like, those are things that I witnessed. My wartime function, like as a human resources professional, just like, in the civilian sector, my wartime function was, typing casualty reports, ensuring that, you know, all of the all of the admin stuff that has to happen when someone loses their life, those are the things that I did. But that's what HR does in the civilian sector as well. When they lose an employee, they have there's things that needs to be done. And so yeah, I mean, I've typed several casualty reports in my military career, um, and I've done casualty notifications. The first time that I ever did one was in Cheyenne, Wyoming, with unfortunately a service member who unalived himself. And so I had to go to the family and, with my officer, notify the family and talk about benefits. And I did that stuff in Iraq as well. What I saw in Iraq that really changed me, one, there was always a threat of potentially being kidnapped, and especially as a woman. So we were all told that if you're kidnapped, just know, obviously, America doesn't negotiate with terrorists, and if you're kidnapped as a female, they set you up for what will most likely happen, right? So that threat is probably what really stressed me out the most there, because you always had to be aware of your surroundings. And then unfortunately, you start stereotyping people that look like the threat, right? Even though most are not bad people, right? And so those are the things that I dealt with over there. And I would say it took me a little bit of time to adjust accordingly. But I did what most people unfortunately don't do. When I came home from Iraq, I immediately went to a counselor and said, let's talk about this stuff, And so I worked through it. And so now it doesn't impact me. There are still maybe names of people that I've typed before. I wonder about the families often. I think that's one of the things that, if anything were to haunt me, but I'm probably way more adjusted than most. There's a little guilt with that, though, coming back okay, you know? So, yeah, that was my time in Iraq.
I appreciate you for sharing that. Thank you because I can tell that that's obviously that those are experiences that will stay with you, right, for life. Now, where you focus on helping veterans transition, right, to project management, HR, things of that nature. Um, what what are some common things that you see with these veterans that seek your help, right? That not only want to transition from uh, military life to civilian life, but what common things do you see in perhaps the issues they're dealing with when they're doing that transition, when they've served a tour, right?
I would say the most common thing that I see, and I did this when I first retired from the military, is that you think you have to prove yourself, and you think that you have to kind of pick up where you left off from the military. There's there's some fundamental things about the military that you're not going to be able to duplicate in the civilian sector, right? And the reason why camaraderie is so strong in the military, especially amongst those people that serve in Iraq, Afghanistan, or war-torn countries or war-torn countries, sorry, the reason why the camaraderie is is so different there, something you can't duplicate, is because those people are the only people that you have, right? And those are the people that are experiencing the same thing. It's like when you serve overseas, and I never served overseas except in Iraq, but when people go to, permanent duty stations like Alaska and Japan and England, they always talk about how tight the communities were, and they want to try to replicate that or duplicate that, but you can't because you were overseas and that's all you had. So you were the American in Japan. And so you congregated with other Americans, and but so then when you go to the civilian sector, the one thing that people often complain about, the veterans complain about, or they're striving to replicate or duplicate is camaraderie. And it's just not going to look the same. And so I tell veterans all the time, you have to create your community that you can do life with. And I recommend that that community is not just filled with other veterans. Fill it with people like diversity, right? Diversity of thought, diversity of, I mean, even ethnicity and gender in your community, diversity of education, whatever it may be, because that's the community that's going to help you with the next part of your life. Because the military is a pillar of my life. That's it. And I've been removed for 5 years. And I'll be honest with you, there are things that I forget that are very common that I'm like, oh, I'm just so far removed from it. So people want to create this camaraderie that they had in the military. And what I always encourage people to do, you're not going to create the same camaraderie. It doesn't exist. So you have to create a sense of community, a network that's going to help you adjust accordingly.
You know, that's interesting you say that because I can see what you're describing as a true challenge because to your point, you're regardless if you're domestic, right? You're within the states or a foreign country. The fact is, you have a group of individuals to your point that are experiencing that specific thing, and then obviously you're going to bond, right? Um, I'm just curious. I don't know if this is a thing where veterans that come back, have you seen the opposite where someone perhaps decides, you know what, I don't want to recreate what I once had because that was authentic, that was like a special situation. I'd rather be, I don't want to say the word recluse, but more of a solitude lifestyle.
Yeah, the people like I can give you examples like my husband and my best friend. We chose, my husband and my best friend, myself included, we all chose to retire from the military. Retiring meaning you serve 20 years. So you get the official designation of retired from the military, and now you can collect your pension. So we chose to retire. We could have stayed longer. We were not forced to retire. And I do believe that the people that choose to retire or choose to separate, it's because they know what they want outside of the military. We wanted choices to be able to move or not move, and some people want the choice to get tattoos, that maybe the military prevented them to do. I personally wanted fancy nails because you can only have, a French manicure in the military or natural nail. My husband wanted to grow out a beard and grow out his hair. And those things seem simple, but when you can't do them for 20 years, we all retired, my husband, myself, and my best friend, we all retired with the thought of we want to leave this regulated and structured environment, not not completely dismiss what it's done for our lives and who we are because of it, but because it's time. Just like civilians leave companies because it's time or they want to do something different or whatever it may be. And so people that truly acknowledge their why to getting out of the service, regardless if it's separation or retirement, they tend to do very well in the civilian sector. They tend to be more adjusted. They actually tend to be more resilient because they know why. The people that ruminate and say the camaraderie this and this in the military and blah, 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 I hear it all the time. Why did you get out then? Why did you get out? Because you could have stayed longer. Now, there are some people that couldn't stay, but most people that I hear all of this rumination from, they could have stayed longer. They chose to get out. So you can't forget your why you decided to do something and own that decision and move forward and make the best out of it.
You know, I can appreciate that explanation. Um, Basically, outgrowing whatever system you've been brought up, or it could be like college, right? After 4 years, you get your degree, you've outgrown that bachelor's degree. Now you're going to move perhaps to a master's or something like that. And I'm just trying to simplify the comparison, but it sounds like at the point that you were ready to retire, you've were probably already satisfied with the level you've achieved. And, you know, to your point, right, there are restrictions of you can only do so much, you can only be so different, right, than your other Air Force colleagues. Um, how was that transition for you mentally and emotionally? Because to your point, right, you're kind of, it sounds like your story is kind of a anomaly in that you've had, you know, you were blessed with a support group, right? And then in your case, you know, you had a spouse and a best friend that retired at the same time. So with all those things considered, how was that transition for you personally?
Yeah, it was super smooth and successful, mainly because I I future proofed my career. You know, in 2013, I almost lost my career, or at least I thought I almost lost my career. I received an evaluation rating that was very unheard of, unprecedented at that time. And it was because a leader wanted to ensure that I wasn't just, a great human resources professional. She wanted me to be a good person. And if I were to be 100% honest, it's easy to look back now. At the time, I thought she was full of shit. But now, like it it was the best worst year of my life because in 2013 I realized that, hey, right now my worth is tied up to work, and yeah, that doesn't seem very healthy. Like, I need to get a life. And so I made the military a part of my life. I got a life, like I got some hobbies, and then I created a community that, were that was filled with other people, not just military members. And because I did that in 2013, 7 more years I worked on my bachelor's and certifications, also on hobbies. And my husband and I, we people always ask us, like, what is your greatest accomplishment from the military? And my husband and I look at each other all the time and it's like being happily married, because most people get divorced when they retire. I mean, I have 3 friends in my life right now that served 20 years with their husbands and they're all getting divorced. And so we started very young in our careers preparing for when we were going to take the uniform off. Why did we start so early? Because our support systems showed us. So I watched Jeff Sanders, Martin Patterson, Tech Sergeant Janet Bassey, because I stayed in touch with them. I watched them leave the service. I watched their decisions and their mistakes and things that they maybe did effective or maybe did ineffectively. And then I just made sure that I mirrored the ones that were effective and stayed away from those that weren't. And so I prepared to take the uniform off. I knew who I was, and I haven't looked back ever since. The only time that I have ever missed the military is when I received a dental bill. But other than that, I don't miss the military. It doesn't mean that I didn't, enjoy serving, but I know exactly why I retired, and I love this life that I get to live now. And I don't take for granted what the military has done for me and continues to do for me with my pension. However, I'm I'm Misty Moreno. I'm not Senior Master Sergeant Moreno, and I don't like to identify myself as that. I don't use veteran as a way to introduce myself or get something. I'm a pretty good person by itself. And so, yeah, my transition has been super smooth and successful, and people call me lucky. There's a lot of rhetoric out there on LinkedIn. People like to send me messages and tell me that I'm doing a disservice to the veteran community because I'm not sharing the doom and gloom. What good does that do? You know, I know who I am. I have adjusted well, and I'm not lucky. I just took action and I choose to take action every single day. And so you can be lucky too if you take action.
You know, when people say John Smith, Jane Smith, whatever, is lucky, they're saying that because they see that person take action. They don't see the multiple failures until they land that job, they get that credential, that degree. The person that says, hey, that person's lucky, they're saying that because that person themselves didn't take the steps, didn't put in the extra 5, 10 hours a week to study. So it's just more of their way of making an excuse of themselves because they're, to be honest with you, perhaps envious of the accomplishments that the individual that they're criticizing has achieved. Um, to your point, at the end of the day, you were still in Iraq. Don't care if it's a month, 6 months, your life was on the line. You had real threats. Doesn't matter if you're in HR, if you were still there serving the country. So your experience, 100% valid. Um, I did want to ask, if you don't mind, how did you meet your husband? Did you both meet each other enlisted, or how did that happen?
Yeah, so I actually became an instructor for Airman Leadership School, and I met him when he was a student, but I met him because he was my student. But I did not meet him, if that makes sense. So I knew of Johnny Moreno because he was my student. And then, a couple days later after he graduated, I saw him because, we were both young and I saw him at the bar and we've been together ever since. So I knew of him because he was a student, not my direct student, but a student. And then we met in the bar and yeah, we've been together. It'll be married 20 years, May.
Is it common for people to actually form a long relationship in the military?
Yeah. And, we both were married and divorced. So we had been married before. That's pretty common, at least in my experience, where because you're in the military and you move a lot, people will get married prior to maybe being ready to marry or knowing that partner. Um, But we knew immediately, like, at that bar, we always joke, like, the next day, we woke up and we just kinda knew, like, there was just something, and for the past 20 years, there's always been something. Um, Sometimes being on different shifts and not living with each other for long periods of time helped because you don't get sick of someone and you really appreciate the time that you have together. But I will tell you that I never truly like I loved him, but when our son was born and I got to see him as a father, the rest is history. Like he's not getting rid of me. So like I fell more in love with him watching him be a father. And even still to this day, like my son is 18 years old. Last night I could hear them wrestling. I think it was like 11 at night. Like that's why we're happily married because we have truly put our marriage first in a way that looks different to most. In child learns to how to be an adult, right? And he's for the most part well adjusted. He makes the same mistakes that teenagers make, same poor decisions that teenagers make, but his recovery time is much better than most because he sees it in real life how we recover from the mistakes and the poor decisions that we make. So,
I love that you clearly have critical thinking skills because you're able to, and again, going back to the book of Proverbs, right? Book of Proverbs states, read this book so that you can find practical wisdom. And so I feel like you've applied practical wisdom, and this is how I grew up. I don't want that. I'm here right now in the military. It's given me X benefit. I think it's time to retire. And then what do I want in the future? Right. And so the fact that you're able to chronologically analyze that says a lot about your abilities to grow and learn from, just your experience in life and the fact that, you're happily married, you have family, you have a son. I'm sure that in itself is perhaps the goal of many, veterans, not all, because everyone has different goals, but I'm sure many veterans want that, and you've achieved that. And with your experience and obviously your successful outcomes, I'm assuming you've shared these experiences with your clients, the veterans that are seeking transition.
I do get, a lot of messages on LinkedIn about, thank you so much for your post and your sharing your experiences. And then when, um, usually the people that are like my students, because I teach for Vets to PM, everything I do is really through Vets to PM. That's the company that I work with now. I utilized them before I retired in order to help me identify my transferable skill set to earn my PMP certification and then really to learn how to write a resume that's going to help me communicate my unique value add. And so everything I do is really just to get them in the Vets to PM system so they can have a smooth and successful transition. Um, a lot of my personal brand has to do with the military transition. And I'm moving away from that a little bit because I am 5 years removed and I don't talk a lot about the logistics of the military transition, about separating or retiring. I talk a lot about the mental transformation that needs to take place for anyone when it comes to this professional career. And I even think about it, it's just in general. My son is 18. He just played his last football game, right? He's not going to college to play football. He knows he doesn't have the talent and the bill to do that, right? And there were a couple weeks when his social media posts and stuff made me realize that he was going through a little bit of a transition, meaning he's not a football player anymore. He just played his last game. And he shared a couple things on social media where it was like taking the jersey off and, stuff like that. And I believe that us humans, we we put our identity and worth into these things that can be taken away from us. And I've learned with my faith that no one can take Jesus Christ away from me. So you can take my career, you can take my money, you can take, unfortunately, the people in my life, but you can't take, my God, my Savior, who gives me, redemption every single day. And that is what my goal is now with any sort of platform that I have. My purpose is to, help human beings become better human beings who then go on and help human beings become better human beings. Because this world is a crazy place right now. And it starts with having those conversations about the orange.
Absolutely, I love it, Misty. It was a pleasure having you. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much.